let's go into some kind of year-end tips. So the first one is in regards to GL closing. That's tends to be a little different.
Yeah, it's actually the same process. I guess the note here is it's not unusual to leave the general ledger open beyond the subsidiary modules, just waiting on final adjustments. So if you're at your year end and you've booked all your AR, AP transactions and you want to move into 2024, it's fine to close, to run the year end process for those subsidiary modules and just leave the general ledger open until you get the final. Well, I don't recommend that you run the year end on the general ledger if you're waiting for adjustments, because you just got to reopen it to book those adjustments. And that's not unusual. So recommendation there is just close all the other modules, leave general ledger open until you've got what you need to close that out for the year. And then you can run the general ledger close. The other bullet point here is, payroll. If you're using payroll, you're always on a calendar year for payroll. Even if your company's on a fiscal year, the payroll module is set up so that, you're always on a calendar year. And like we said earlier, you're running quarter ends within the payroll module rather than the monthly period ends within the subsidiary module.
So one thing I always have to remind myself, Dave, is if your GL is in December and you've moved AR or sales order up to January, can you post a batch in AR back to December, or is it gonna lock you from doing that?
Yeah, it's gonna lock you from doing that.
Okay, so even though the GL is back that month, the AR is gonna move forward.
Yeah.
So it'll prevent you from doing that. So that's good.
Yeah. So really, I mean, like we said earlier, you don't really want to run the process until you've kind of finalized all your transactions in that subsidiary module. In the general ledger, leave that open for general ledger adjusting entries. But, the assumption is you've gotten through all the detailed transactions in those subsidiary modules before you run that process.
And the other thing is, there is no preventing of posting forward, so it's never gonna hold you back from posting into a future period. It would only prevent you from posting in backwards.
That is a good. There is a. I'm going to get the answer. There is now a. I think it's either a permissions setting or it's a preference in the system that can prevent a user. You can prevent a user from posting to a future period. They've added that. The issue with that, and I got to find out where it is, but the issue with that, because I don't know off the top of my head without looking for it, but issue with that is if you're not current in running your period ends, then you're kind of preventing users from doing what they need them to do, right? So
kind of to a couple of our frequently asked questions, can I print a financial statement for the next fiscal year prior to performing year-end processing?
Yeah. They're in the older versions that sometimes became an issue because of the roll forward that we were talking about. But you can, if your general ledger's still open in 2023 and you get to the end of January 2024, then yes, you can print a financial statement for January. You don't want to go in and change the current period in the general ledger options to do that. When the report screen comes up, it'll just default to it'll default to the period that it's going to run the statement for, and you can just click on the next period and run it for that period going forward. So there really are no restrictions on printing financial statements. You can print them for any previous year, any future year, regardless of what period your general ledger module is in.
Good. All right, after year-end processing, can I delete accounts that will no longer be used in the fiscal year and still run comparison statements?
Yeah, you cannot do that. Well, you don't want to do that. I mean, the general ledger information for prior fiscal years is stored by that account number. And so if you delete an account number, now we can't create a comparative financial. Matter of fact, it's difficult to even do it. I mean, there's a lot of controls that prevent that from happening. So best thing to do is if you want to no longer use some accounts, but you still want to have them available for comparative financial reporting, is just to inactivate them. So if you're on a current version of Sage, then in account maintenance, there's a status drop down that allows you to set an account as inactive. And what that means is if a user goes to book an entry to that account, you can either prevent that through permissions or at least warn them that the account is inactive. So you're preventing somebody from posting to an inactive account, but retaining that transaction history for comparative financial reporting purposes.
Yeah, and ultimately, when you go down to the subsidiary ledgers in AR, you can't get rid of a customer that has historical data.
Yeah.
Once you're past that historical period, you can get rid of them. But you might have that set to 5 years or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, right. It's always better if you can inactivate things. It's difficult, and really, like you said, accounts receivable for customers, payable for vendors, inventory for inventory items. I mean, there are now, statuses to set items, customers, vendors, accounts as inactive, and then you don't have to see them in your lookups and report on them and that kind of thing. But you're retaining the history of those items that way.
Right. All right. So the second to last question: can I process year-end in GL before I finish the other modules?
Yeah, no, you would not want to do that. Back to our conversation about, all the other modules, transactional modules, post up through the general ledger. And so that the general ledger would be the very last module that you'd run the period end on.
And then assuming we close the module and then we come up with something we need to post backwards, can we reopen that module?
Yeah, you can actually reopen a closed module. It's very simple to do. You just go into the options for the module and you change the current fiscal period and the current fiscal year back to the period that you need to post the transaction to. You then enter the transaction, and then you go back into options for that module, and you just change the fiscal year and or the fiscal period and the fiscal year back. So there's no need to rerun the process inside a Sage, the year-end, period-end process. You're literally just changing the period to the period you need to close, book the entry to, update the entry, and then just change the period back. So very simple process.